Is that muted?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so thanks for coming to our 10th episode of Liberty in Europe. My name is Demelza Hayes.
My name is Andreas Kohl.
And today our guest is Dr. Rahim Taghizadegan.
Well
done. He is a professor at the International Academy for Philosophy in Liechtenstein. And he is also the founder of the Scholarium, which used to be called, what was the old name?
Well, it's a long German name. The English translation would be Institute for Value-Based Economics.
Okay, so the Institute for Value-Based Economics. And today we just wanted to talk about a couple of the opportunities available for people to study Austrian economics or to work with Austrian economics in Vienna or in Liechtenstein. And yeah, so I guess we can just go ahead and get started. So you work both in Vienna and in Liechtenstein, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that's like a 6-hour commute or something around there, right?
Take the train, yes.
Okay. Okay.
So we like to ask our guests, as one of our first introductory questions, what you may have done in the past few months or the past year in order to advance the cause of liberty in Europe. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, I started a new study program called Kraftprobe, based in Vienna. It's just getting started. It was about a year in preparation. And we already have students here in Vienna who are pursuing it as a full-time study program. And it's going very well. And what we try is to combine entrepreneurial mindset with the realistic approach of the Austrian school. Not only in economics, but also the interdisciplinary approach that was so important about the Austrian school in the first place. So I think it's a very valuable combination, combined with a lot of hands-on experience. In Austria, we still have a strong tradition in the crafts. I call it the Kraftprobe, but at the same time in German, Kraftprobe means a trial of strength. So we try to bring this very realistic approach, which is inherent to Austrian history, I'd say, and the Austrian school to life again, and try to apply it to real-world problems and challenges. And there are so many challenges nowadays. It's a very interesting, fascinating time to be alive for a young person.
Sure, and I'm sure a lot of our young viewers would be really interested in taking part in this program. So I've read that this program can be taken as a gap year. It usually lasts between 12 months. Can you tell us what a student could expect to do during this time?
Yes, it's at the most 1 year. So not longer than that. It's not considered as an alternative to a study degree at the university if you still want to pursue one. So rather it's an addition. So we have 5 main areas of our study and pursuits, which are first entrepreneurship and the market. Second, it's philosophy and economics, realistic philosophy and economics. As you see, third, it's nature. Like trying to learn from nature and the outdoors experience that we cherish in Austria so much to make you independent and autonomous, because most people living nowadays are so afraid to lose the living standards that they are very easy for manipulations and state dependence. Fourthly, it's art and design. Austria has a long tradition in the arts, and the last part is IT and technology, because without some experience in coding and trying to keep track of technological innovations of our time, you'll have a hard time adding value as an entrepreneur.
And what are you looking for in prospective applicants? Is there any certain characteristics or background that you prefer?
Yeah, we prefer down-to-earth people. What we experience mostly at university is young people living in a kind of parallel universe where they somehow never become adults or stay dependent kids most of their life, and expect that everything, someone will decide for them, and someone will show them and tell them and teach them and certify them and examine them and give them their jobs, which are all kind of entitlements. So you earn your entitlements from one step to the next. So that's not what we are looking for. We are looking for down-to-earth, independent young people who are not afraid of the future, who are looking forward to the challenges, but at the same time are realistic. And that's hard to say, because nowadays, if you're realistic and you look at the world, in particular in Europe, the first reaction is to get a huge depression and wonder, well, is there any path open? So it's getting past this depression stage, but still over the depression stage, and most stop before. You just live in this parallel universe where everything is fine, just the way it is, or it won't be that bad, and so on. And I think it's very peculiar to combine these two things, and that's what we call in Austria, and particularly in Vienna, the merry apocalypse. And it was present in the 19th century already. Apocalypse means we really face reality. We're not painting over some rainbows or so on. We really face it. We see the problems, we see things are heading, but at the same time, we try to adapt to this reality. We try to make best out of it, and we try to see the opportunities that are there, and there are huge opportunities nowadays.
Okay, and it sounds really interesting, but just for a few of our viewers in America, is it in English or is it in German?
German and English. So people who don't speak German can participate, can come. They'll learn some German, I mean, of course, in their own pace and time. We are quite a multilingual team here. Of course, most Europeans are quite multilingual, but our team in particular, we use about 5 languages. At the same time, we have language classes. Right now, we have Russian and Italian next to German and English, which are languages that are pursued at the craft probe. Arabic is possibility as well, and quite a few other languages. So if you're English speaking, no problem. Everyone understands English who is a clever young person in Europe nowadays. So you won't have a problem with that. You might pick up some German, which is quite a useful language if you're interested in philosophy, in Austrian economics, and at the same time, interestingly, it's the language that has the most economic advantage for non-German speakers picking it up, because the German area of Germany, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Austria is still an industrially quite strong area. So it's a language that really pays off if you figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, with it you won't feel out of place if you don't speak German yet. So we are very open, welcoming to English-speaking students from all around the world.
Okay.
So that sounds great for me. I really need to improve my German.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned an outdoors aspect to the craft probe. Now that reminds me, actually, I've been looking through some of the works you've written, and I think you wrote a book actually about Alpine philosophy.
Yes.
Now, can you tell us what that is and how that can relate to the craft probe project?
Yes, well, I've always been wondering why it was in particular Austria where the Austrian school emerged. And there are quite a few reasons for that. One of the reasons is that in particular Vienna is a place where the Alpine Europe meets the plains of the East. And it's a kind of contrast between liberty and equality. It's a contrast between small-scale patriotism and large-scale nationalism. So living in a rugged landscape usually tends to more decentralized political landscapes and translates into that. And we still have remains, in particular in Austria. And what's still great about Austria is not so much the cities, it's, I think, the secluded alpine valleys and summits where some really down-to-earth people are still living, who are very autonomous, very independent, people very much minded about their liberty in a sense of just leave us alone. I mean, you won't even get there. People who are willing and able to live out of their own means and not extort money from other people to make their living. So that's one thing that still keeps me in Austria with all the political trouble or tendencies that there are. So I did a kind of ethnological study about this Alpine culture and mindset, and of course it lives in Switzerland, and of course it lives in Liechtenstein. It wasn't a book particularly about Austria, but it's about the Alpine region in Europe, and I think I was able to show how some nowadays forgotten mindsets and philosophies of life and traditions link back to a more liberty-oriented tradition in Europe, which I think has inspired also a lot of intellectual traditions in the end. So I think that the Austrian school was created in Austria is partly due to this confrontation of this down-to-earth, realistic approach, because in the Alps, you cannot afford to live in a parallel world. You just stumble. It's impossible. You really have to be very realistic. It's very tough to survive in these surroundings, in this climate. So you really need to take into consideration reality. You need to look where you're stepping. Otherwise, you'll end up in a crevice. And I think this realism is what's really about in the Austrian school, and not only the Austrian school in economics, but also in political science. I think there's largely forgotten very rich tradition in political science as well, and ethics, and of course psychology, history, culture, and all the other Viennese schools that emerged in this time. We have a beautiful saying in Austria that says, Austria is the small world where the larger one tries it all out before. And it was so true in the 19th century. Almost everything that ravaged the 20th century was thought out before, experienced, examined, and confronted in Austria. Austria was the place where the same coffee shop was frequented by Hitler, Lenin, Trotsky, Tito, Herzl on the one hand, and on the other hand, you had all the geniuses like Adler and Freud and Mises and Schumpeter and Max Weber and so on. They basically all went to the same coffee shop. So it was very intense, and it was a meeting of an old European tradition of learning and the reality of modernity, which somehow, well, it was just there, and you needed to adapt to it, you need to understand it, to make the best out of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, on a related note, there's another topic you've written about, which is kind of in the same area, and that's the Vienna School of Natural Law Ethics, and that's different from the Austrian School of Economics. Can you introduce us to it and tell us why it's relevant?
Yes, well, it's one of the many, many Viennese schools. It's also completely forgotten, I say nowadays. It's part of the scholastic tradition, so it's mostly Catholic thinkers, in particular Johannes Messner, who termed this term Viennese School of Natural Law Ethics. It's just showing that at the same time there was a forgotten tradition of natural law ethics at the same place where positivism emerged, like the opposite of it. I wouldn't claim that the Viennese School of Natural Law Ethics gives a particular code that's very important. It just shows the depth of interdisciplinary studies. And I think it's quite worthwhile to look into the scholastic, monastic traditions which are based on Aristotle and Aquinas, and I think which have shaped the Austrian School of Economics as well, not directly, or more or less indirectly. And so we have a convergence there. And it's interesting that later scholars of the Austrian school, like Murray Rothbard, went back to natural law, because at the time that Mises was working, seemed like positivism had the upper hand, and already in Mises' times it seemed to fade away, this natural law historical tradition, which was the main part of the scholastic ethics at university. So the European university tradition was quite scholastic and monastic. And in Austria, it was confronting modern reality. and that led to all different diverging paths. One of it was positivism, and I think it contributes something to understanding. It's just going from the other side, but it has to combine with this other traditions like the Vienna School of Natural Law Ethics to see that those are all parts looking at different problems and how to live a good life in modern reality, which doesn't always conform to our wishes.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any authors that you would recommend for our readers and for us? Maybe something that's not in German or that's translated?
Like on the natural law ethics, or I don't know what this.
Yes, yeah, on
The Vienna School.
I
Vienna School.
If anything is translated in English, probably.
Yes, in my
probably not.
In my research.
Yes, I mean the older writers still use Latin, and then we have German. I don't think most of there's a lot of hidden heritage that hasn't been translated.
Okay.
Because German at the time was a language of science, so people learned German to read the texts. So there wasn't that need to translate a lot of it. So it's rather the more recent works that then have been translated. And of course, usually works of people who had to emigrate due to National Socialism abroad. So of course, then you have a lot of texts in English, or even published originally in English, which is amazing that people very late in their age, like Mises, wrote in English. So they have a new foreign language and mastered it and wrote treatises in this language. But there's a lot of hidden treasures from the Viennese traditions and the divergent Viennese schools of thinking that I don't think have been translated. So it helps to speak some German if you have a historic interest in these things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, right now we live in Liechtenstein and we're learning Alemannisch. Do you think we'd be able to read? We'd be able to read books in High German if we learn Alemannisch, or not really? Probably not.
No, not really. Not really.
Okay.
You'll have a hard time. But still,
Yeah.
I mean, even if people have a hard time, because the German of the 19th century is a German in which the sentences go over pages. They just don't stop. That's a very German way of thinking. It's you want to be thorough. So you want to have every potential counter argument, you already have it in one sentence. So you have all the excursions within one sentence. So even if you're native, it's difficult. And to some students, I recommend to read, for example, Mises in English and not in German, because if your English is good enough, it's easier. Yeah.
Okay.
It's out something, but it takes very long concentration spans to read those texts. So we try to do a lot of digesting and boiling it down and translating it to modern times. But that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you learn one of the dialects, then of course it's related, but almost like a second language. So for Swiss people and Alemannic people, they learn High German at school, and for most it's like a foreign high language that they use well at official in official situations, but not day-to-day interactions. So they sound a bit forced in High German. So it's like they're speaking a foreign language. But that's of course it has an Alpine background. The dialects are very diverse. It means that there's a lot of decentralism, even in language. Of course, the modern high languages and the standardizations are an impact of nationalism. It was all done for state schools, trying to make a people alike. Of course, in reality, language has a gradient. You can't really say, well, that's German and that's not German. It just flows. One valley to the next, you can't really tell if it's still German or it's already the next language and the next cultural influence.
Okay. Well, just so that people can hear about some of the other programs that you're involved with, you're also involved, you're a professor at the International Academy for Philosophy. And can you tell us a little bit more about that? How can students get involved?
It is a tiny, tiny university, but that's the great thing about Liechtenstein. Things are tiny. It means you don't have the problems of large-scale institutions. It's as tiny that you can only do a PhD program at the moment. It used to be larger in the past, but fortunately it survived at all. So there's only a PhD program right now. The main focus is on philosophy, but yes, the Austrian School of Economics is quite philosophical, and our faculty, not only me, but all of the faculty basically has a good knowing of the Austrian school and takes a keen interest in the Austrian school. So it's possible to pursue a PhD degree in Austrian economics, in particular if you're interested in the epistemological, philosophical issues of Austrian economics. But even my colleague Guido Hülsmann from France is supervising PhD thesis there, so you can go quite deeply into economics as well, if you like. But it's all one-on-one teaching and mentoring. It's really tiny. There are no classes and big lectures and stuff like that. It's really small, very high faculty to student ratio. So if you're into pursuing a PhD program, I think it's a good idea to take a look into that. You can study in English, you can write your PhD in English, and German, of course, as well. Even Latin we offer for those who still pursue it. Might be still some people left out there. So that's for the program. That's for the moment. That's just the program we offer. We are preparing a master's program, and we'll try to offer a master's program, but it's challenging. And of course, we have the problem in education that there's huge crowding out by the state, which means in Europe, for most Europeans, it's almost for free to pursue an accredited degree, which of course will soon be worthless. But well, if it's for free, you don't really look into it that much. So that's challenging. We'll see. Of course, we need to find some additional funding because it's very hard to finance something on a student fee basis. The fees are quite steep for a European student. I think rather cheap compared to American universities. But in Europe, students usually don't take out credits and would consider it foolish to take out a credit to pursue a study program. So that's challenging. Of course, if it wants to remain a small-scale university, it will be a challenge, but we're optimistic that one day we'll offer a master program with particular focus on Austrian economics and get it accredited for what it's worth.
So for such a small country, Liechtenstein has actually a really high proportion of things related to Austrian economics. There's the European Center for Austrian Economics Foundation. What would you attribute this to? Is it interest from the princely family?
Yes. Yes. But at the same time, it's a wealthy country with a high bourgeoisie. I'd say citizens who are used to not being to a high degree dependent on the state, have quite decentralized, liberty-oriented general mindset. Of course, they have politicians as well, and they're just as bad. But in general, I think the population is friendlier. And of course, they have to be. It's like the role model of a decentralized state. Even secession rights down to the smallest community. Liechtenstein is the only country in the world. It's as small as it is. It still offers the possibility to split up even further if the citizens don't like to live in this country anymore. So of course, it's destined to be a place for Austrian economics. There should be more interest. So even though there you have observed there's quite some, I think there should be more active interest in it. And I think the princely family is holding a bit back. And well, of course, for diplomatic reason, I'd say you don't want to hang out too much with libertarian ideas, which nowadays usually associated with the Austrian school. So I think there could be more and should be more, and it would be the perfect place for reviving those traditions and becoming a role model for the challenge world nowadays. And I'd be happier if more of those opportunities would be taken. Well, I'm working hard to push those. I know the Princely family well, and I know they are eager to learn about Austrian economics, are very friendly towards Austrian economics, but a bit held back. But it's just a Liechtenstein way to be careful and slowly move along.
I read that as early as the early 20th century, actually the total amount that of savings from Liechtensteiners outnumbered the state budget 6 times. That's a pretty unique number. Would you say that's part of Alpine philosophy?
Yeah, certainly. It's interesting that for people living in the Alps, saving has always been very important because you cannot survive without saving in the Alps. You have to take account of the seasons. So usually there was even a house dedicated to saving where you have all your stocks to survive the year. So it doesn't lend itself to a consumerist society where somehow wealth comes from some other place and is moved up the mountains. That just doesn't work. So of course, people are saving and thus trying to cater for their own needs by themselves, and being independent this way has always been a large part of Alpine thinking and Alpine living.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we met you at the 10th annual Gottfried von Habler conference hosted by the European Center for Austrian Economics Foundation, I think year before. Do you remember us?
Sure.
Yeah, we met you there at the conference.
And we also met each other there.
Oh, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, we're going to come to the conference this year for the 12th annual one. We missed the 11th annual conference, but yeah. And then, I wanted to ask, so I'm on the subscription. I have subscribed to the newsletter for the Scholarium, and I clicked on the Google Translate of the email that I got because it's in German. And the message said that you're going to have a speech with Dr. Hoppe.
Yes,
coming up?
Next week Hans Hoppe is visiting us again.
Okay.
Yeah, we're happy to.
That's really nice.
I've known him for a very long time. And he is spending part of his life in Austria. He has a house in Austria, apart from living in Turkey.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, and is this open to the public? And it's probably in German, I guess? It's in German,
yes. In German, we have no more space left. Okay. So it's all full. It's for our supporters who can join in via live stream. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, great.
The Scholarium is all privately funded, and we are proud about that. It's very challenging to do something like that in Austria, out of all places where everything is funded. And we have turned down 1 million in funding offers by the state to buy us off. So it's very unusual to do this. But we are only able to do so because we have quite a few people who take an interest in our work and support us by regular contributions. And it's our way of giving back. So all our events are paid for or supporter-only events. That's the only way to run something like that. So people who value us really need to contribute to our work voluntarily. I think we offer huge value. So every euro you get to us, you get something in value in return. But we depend on regular contributions to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on a bit from what you do to some more deeper, maybe analytical questions that maybe you as a philosopher can address. What do you think has happened to Austrian economics in Austria? Why are Austrians not aware of it, and what is its future?
Well, the whole intellectual tradition of Vienna has died out completely. It wasn't only National Socialism, but after National Socialism, in Vienna, the socialists have been, the international socialists have been in charge. Hayek tried to bring back thinkers of diverse Viennese intellectual traditions back to Austria, and the then Chancellor Kreisky from the socialists intervened, and it was made impossible to bring those people back. So it's not only National Socialism, but of course National Socialism had a big impact on all the traditions, because once you start to somehow divide people by nation and even ethnic background, of course intellectual tradition has a hard time surviving. State interfered even more in the university, and the European university, which has been the role model all around the world, has basically died. And that's one of the main reasons why I created the Scholarium. The university means Universitas Magistrorum et Scholarium, which is the community of teaching and the learning. But the community of the teaching forgot that it's about learning, and they like the idea of being learned and somehow have a privilege because they are learned, and not being dependent on offering voluntarily accepted services to the people, but extort money because of the privilege that they're able to examine, to control, to license, and so on. And we had all this explosion of intellectuals and the mushrooming of universities, which has had a pernicious effect on the whole world. If you trace the history of the European university spreading, you see nationalism, socialism, and so on spreading worldwide. So it was really a movement of intellectuals. It was this Universitas Magistrorum, I say the community of clerks, of privilege-oriented clerks, and the Universitas Scholarium, the community of those learning, of those who want to understand reality, has been wiped out. And there was still some life left in some hidden corners of the European university system, but I think it's now safe to say that it has died out as well. The last kick of the almost dead horse was a bureaucratic standardization of universities in Europe called the Bologna Reform, which has done a great harm to the universities and made somehow standardized schools out of university, where people take degrees that can be compared everywhere, which means everyone has to do more or less the same stuff. Where I think it's safe to say that this tradition is dead. So even if there were still Austrian economists left who are academics, they'd have a hard time. I think I'm the only one teaching at the university. And of course, I have been kicked out of universities for teaching Austrian economics because some considered unscientific. I have usually been in other universities confined to the soft departments like sociological, philosophical, and so on approaches, because in economics it's either orthodox or heterodox, and heterodox is only Marxist or gender. So you're in between the chairs. And it's really hard, and most of my academic colleagues sooner or later abandon the core of the Austrian school, I'd say, and it's this unchallenged or challenging realism to the world, where you just don't conform to what's politically correct or up to date, or what can be said and what can't be said, but you just want to learn and you want to understand what's going on and not be specialized and confined to some small area. Whenever I was teaching at university, I hardly ever had an interesting discussion on subjects with my colleagues. Just everyone leaves each other alone. You're on your confined field. We just don't interfere because we know it just be struggles about money and political leanings. So there is no interdisciplinary spirit left. Colleagues just do the teaching, and students just do the stupid multiple choice tests and get the degrees. I think they somehow have learned something. Of course, you can still learn something, but it's despite being at university in most cases that you do so. So I think even there, if there were still academic Austrians, they'd have a hard time and either resign themselves to some small corner at a university or adapt their thinking to what's en vogue, what can be said, what's fine, what funds are there for, and so on. And I've seen a lot of corruption of intelligent people, but the whole history of European universities is a history of corruption. Of intellectuals who have given up the quest for truth for a comfy position, living at the expense of other people and not caring too much about reality and what people are looking for and would really need in a time like that.
Mm. So you think the outlooks for Austrian economics or the search for truth is bleak, or are you more optimistic?
No, it's great. Hasn't hardly been a time when there was so much need for this outlook. So I'm very optimistic. I'm not optimistic about the institutions, but I don't care much about the institutions. And I think they'll continue trying to buy off some of it and fake another bit of it to stay relevant. But I think it's a losing battle for them. And with most traditional jobs disappearing in the future and most clerk-related jobs disappearing, I think students will realize that the value of the education is maybe not in the degree, which will in no way be. It still is partly an entitlement to getting access to jobs, but I think the value of this is decreasing, and that's a good development, of course, because it opens up this highly distorted market, an educational market, one of the most distorted markets out there, maybe only next to security and defense. And I think it will open up a new place for innovations. Because so much money is spent on education and the output is just terrible. So I think there's a huge potential for real quest for truth and learning.
Well, just going back a bit, and I'm sorry if this is too deep, it might have no objective answer, but why do you think it is that socialism and nationalism has taken over universities and the general thinking when the more free market Austrian perspective is way more realistic? What do you think enticed people and universities to switch over to this other kind of thinking?
I think that the Marxist analysis is right. It's all about material incentives. Those are ideologies that offer huge employment opportunities for intellectuals. It's no coincidence that the highest amount of economists ever having a job was in the Soviet Union. Okay, now on a higher quota of economists being paid salaries, having a job, feeling important than in socialist countries. And of course, we have nationalist intellectuals in history and the cultural studies and so on. It has huge potential for nationalism because once you define history, you more or less define the legitimizing ideology of the state. And that was, of course, a situation where the Austrian School of Economics emerged in contrast to the historical school, which not because the Austrian School was against history, but because they realized it's history in charge of legitimizing a power structure and ever more state encroachments. So I think that's the main reason. And in a free society, there wouldn't be that much to do for intellectuals. There would still be teachers and there would still be people who keep alive a tradition, but far less than there are today. I don't think you'd have thousands and thousands of sociologists in Austria as our university produces them now. I've studied sociology myself as well, and it's a fascinating subject, but it's only part of a larger picture. And even economics, and even if you study Austrian economics, I think there's not a need for that many theoretical economists out there. You have to face it. So someone thinks just by studying economics, he somehow has an entitlement to a job. I don't see it. I think Hayek was very right when he said you can recognize a bad economist if he's only an economist, and the whole Austrian school would be unthinkable without this interdisciplinary interchange of ideas. And studying Austrian economics back at the days was very much being confronted with ideas from psychology, from history, from political science, from philosophy, and that was what the seminar run by Mises was like. It was like the major intellectuals of all the disciplines coming together and trying to understand reality as it was happening before their eyes. So the whole thing of pursuing one specialized discipline and studying it and then becoming an economist by studying economics, I think it's foolish. It's got nothing to do with reality. So it's understandable once you face that and you've built all your life on becoming an intellectual I mean, you realize there are easier ways. There are easier ways than try to be a free market intellectual.
So really we should try to be polymaths.
No, you shouldn't. It depends. If you want to pursue theory and reflection, you necessarily have to be. But we don't need that many people pursuing it, and they are not even the most important people, and they are usually really bad people. So I'd be happy for it. We need people who have an understanding of theory in all the practical disciplines. I think they make great entrepreneurs if they have a long-term vision and long-term understanding of things and are able to think a bit ahead and not just what's fashionable now, but what might become important to people in 5 years, in 10 years. That's where real innovation is happening. So I think in almost every field, some exposure to theory is a great thing, but it has to be shaped on reality, and the theory that's happening in the university nowadays doesn't really prepare you for anything, I'd say.
So just before we close this up, I'm going to ask if there's any questions from the audience. I think there's a few viewers here, so if you have anything you want to ask for him, now is the time to write your question in the chat box.
And while we're waiting for people to ask questions, I'm just going to do a quick announcement for Liberty.me. There is a show called Bitcoin Brothers, and it's going to be interviewing Dr. Bob Murphy, who's a famous Austrian economist. And that's going to be on October 9th at 9:30 p.m. EDT. And there's also going to be another show, let's see, with, it's going to be Christians and Liberty, and that's going to be with Norman Horn and Doug Stewart, and that's going to be tonight, actually, at 9:30 p.m. EDT. So if anyone is interested in those topics, you could come and watch Liberty.me later on today. And also Dr. Taghizadegan. How do you pronounce it?
Taghizadegan. But Rahim is easier, so.
Okay. Well, is there any way, what would you recommend if people want to find more information about Craftprobe or the Scholarium or IAP? Is there a website, or should they just?
Yes, for the Craftprobe, it's craftprobe.com. And it's all in English, so easy to read, easy to figure out. No Google Translate needed. For the Scholarium, there's not much content in English right now, because that Scholarium is our place in Vienna, and it's mostly supported by German-speaking people here. And well, it's just a place where it's all happening. And the IAP.li is website our university in Liechtenstein, and it has, of course, a site in English. Everything is translated to English and can be checked out in English. So it's either craftprobe.com or iap.li.
Can people visit the Scholarium? I think you have a library. What's the access to that like?
Yes, you can, but of course we have full-time work and research going on here. So we have quite a few public events, usually once or twice a term really open access events. And for our supporters, they of course have always access to our library. It's, I think, the largest library on the Austrian school in Europe, and it's a great place to be here. It could be larger. We are almost always crowded, but it's a great space we found here. We're quite close to the university and city center of Vienna. It's a beautiful space right next to an old monastery, one of the last few remaining urban monasteries in Vienna. Yeah, I think we found a beautiful place for the moment. If you are in Vienna, let us know. We may find a way to accommodate you. Also have quite a few people visiting us. Yeah, just give us information ahead.
Well, thank you very much for coming on our show, and we look forward to keeping up with all of the stuff that's going on in the German-speaking world. And yeah, I hope we can follow your updates.
Thank you very much for having me. All the best for your show.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening or good night from Vienna, and have a nice afternoon in the US, I guess.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See everyone next week.
Is to get a huge depression and wonder well, if there any path open. So it's getting past this depression stage, but still over the depression stage, and won't stop before. You just live in this parallel universe where everything is fine, just the way it is, or it won't be that bad, and so on. And I think it's very peculiar to combine these two things, and that's what we call in Austria, and particularly in Vienna, the merry apocalypse. And it was present in the 19th century already. Apocalypse means we really face reality. We're not painting over some rainbows or so on. We really face it. We see the problems, we see things are heading, but at the same time, we try to adapt to this reality. We try to make best out of it, and we try to see the opportunities that are there, and there are huge opportunities nowadays.
Okay, and it sounds really interesting, but just for a few of our viewers in America, is it in English or is it in German?
German and English. So people who don't speak German can participate, can come. They'll learn some German, I mean, of course, in their own pace and time. We are quite a multilingual team here. Of course, most Europeans are quite multilingual, but our team in particular, we use about 5 languages to real-world problems and challenges. And there are so many challenges nowadays. It's a very interesting, fascinating time to be alive for a young person.
Sure, and I'm sure a lot of our young viewers would be really interested in taking part in this program. So I've read that this program can be taken as a gap year. It usually lasts between 12 months. Can you tell us what a student could expect to do during this time?
Yes, it's at the most 1 year, so not longer than that. It's not considered as an alternative to a study degree at the university if you still want to pursue one. So rather, it's an addition. We have 5 main areas of our study and pursuits, which are first entrepreneurship and the market. Second, it's philosophy and economics, realistic philosophy and economics, as you see. Third, it's nature, like trying to learn from nature, and the outdoors experience that we cherish in Austria so much to make you independent and autonomous, because most people living nowadays are so afraid to lose the living standards that they are very easy for manipulations and state dependence. Fourthly, it's art and design. Austria has a long tradition in the arts, and the last part is IT and technology, because without some experience in coding and trying to keep track of technological innovations of our time, you'll have a hard time adding value as an entrepreneur.
And what are you looking for in prospective applicants? Is there any certain characteristics or background that you prefer?
Yeah, we prefer down-to-earth people. What we experience mostly at university is young people living in a kind of parallel universe where they somehow never become adults or stay dependent kids most of their life, and expect that everything, someone will decide for them and someone will show them and tell them and teach them and certify them and examine them and give them their jobs, which are all kind of entitlements. So you earn your entitlements from one step to the next. So that's not what we are looking for. We are looking for down-to-earth, independent, young people who are not afraid of the future, who are looking forward to the challenges, but at the same time are realistic. And that's hard to say, because nowadays, if you're realistic and you look at the world, in particular in Europe, the first reaction...
As one of our first introductory questions, what you may have done in the past few months or the past year in order to advance the cause of liberty in Europe. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, I started a new study program called Kraftprobe, based in Vienna. It's just getting started. It was about a year in preparation. And we already have students here in Vienna who are pursuing it as a full-time study program. And it's going very well. And what we try is to combine entrepreneurial mindset with the realistic approach of the Austrian school, not only in economics, but also the interdisciplinary approach that was so important about the Austrian school in the first place. So I think it's a very valuable combination, combined with a lot of hands-on experience. In Austria, we still have a strong tradition in the crafts. I call it the Kraftprobe, but at the same time in German, Kraftprobe means a trial of strength. So we try to bring this very realistic approach, which is inherent to Austrian history, I'd say, and the Austrian school to life again, and try to apply it.
Is that muted?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so thanks for coming to our 10th episode of Liberty in Europe. My name is Demelza Hayes.
And my name is Andreas Kohl.
And today our guest is Dr. Rahim Taghizadegan.
Well done.
He is a professor at the International Academy for Philosophy in Liechtenstein, and he is also the founder of the Scholarium, which used to be called, what was the old name?
Well, it's a long German name. The English translation would be Institute for Value-Based Economics.
Okay, so the Institute for Value-Based Economics. And today we just wanted to talk about a couple of the opportunities available for people to study Austrian economics or to work with Austrian economics in Vienna or in Liechtenstein. And yeah, so I guess we can just go ahead and get started. So you work both in Vienna and in Liechtenstein, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that's like a 6-hour commute or something around there, right?
Take the train, yes.
Okay. Okay.
So we like to ask our guests